Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music. And now, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, the U.S. and Great Britain launch airstrikes on Houthi rebels that have been striking U.S. bases and restricting trade through the Red Sea. A Boeing 737 MAX door operated by Alaska Air blows out mid-air. And loose bolts are found in other Boeing 737s as well. December's consumer price index was released, so is inflation getting under control? Taiwan goes to the polls tomorrow to vote for a new president. How will these elections affect China's determination to reunify the independent country? Tonight, we're going to talk with China expert Dennis Unkovic about China's military buildup, their reunifying Taiwan, and their goal to overtake the United States as the #1 superpower. A lot to cover for the next 28 minutes, so join us because this is Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi and welcome. I'm Laborde. I hope everyone had a great week. Well, last weekend, disaster was averted when a door plug blew out on a Boeing 737 MAX 9 commercial jet that was operated by Alaska Airlines in midair. Now, no casualties were involved, but almost 200 737 MAX 9 planes have now been grounded for inspection. United Airlines have since found those loose bolts on several of their 737 MAX 9 planes, and Alaska Airlines have also found more loose bolts and hardware on its aircraft as well. An investigation by the NTSB is presently underway. So, well, how did our money do this week? Well, the tech and communication services led for the week. And the pops today were energy and real estate sectors, and the drops, well, they were in healthcare, discretionary, and the utility stocks. Tech sector was up nearly 5% for the week, and Bitcoin started an ETF this week and ended at $43,673, but it was down $2,800 for the day. All the major averages ended higher for the week, and the S&P 500 hit a 52 high for the week. And this week, Dow Jones, they closed up 0.3 of a point for the week. The S&P 500, they closed up just below 1.9%. And the NASDAQ, they closed up just over 3% for the week. December's consumer price index was released yesterday, coming in hotter or higher than expected. Inflation for the month was up an additional 0.3% from November. And core prices, which exclude food and energy, also rose 0.3% since November. So for the year, the CPI was up an additional 3.4% year over year. The Eurasia Group has come out with their biggest risks of this year in 24, or what those on Wall Street would call black swans, global occurrences that could spook the markets. According to the group, they see the U.S. elections in November as the biggest event, but close behind is going to be the Middle East with Houthi rebels and Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. The ongoing group war with Ukraine, with Russia, is of major concern with also Eastern Europe. Now, tomorrow, January 13th, will be Taiwan's presidential elections, and China is watching closely as to who will win. There are 3 candidates, with the leading candidate being William Lei. He's present vice president of the ruling DDP. Now, if Lei wins, as many are predicting, the Chinese communists will not be happy. Lei is wanting to maintain Taiwan's independence from China, where the other 2 candidates are not as much. Yesterday's Wall Street Journal noted that if Taiwan's Vice President William Lei does win and defy Chinese communists, they'll probably step up provocative actions. If Lei wins, it's expected that Beijing will probably be taking a hostile stance towards Taiwan and possibly be using military intimidation, also reducing economic ties with Taiwan and questioning the security of Taiwan's supply chains, which will be affecting us here in the United States. Moody's has cut China from stable to negative in their credit rating and just released China's economic data that shows that annual exports have fallen for the first time in 7 years. In December, their exports have beaten expectations, but their total trade has declined. Now, for 2022, with the United States, China's exports to the U.S. are just above $380 billion more than we're shipping to them. Now, this is creating a trade deficit that even former President Donald Trump was trying to put a stop to. Now, joining us tonight to talk about this, along with China's military buildup, is Dennis Unkovic. Dennis is not only a senior partner at Meyer, Unkovic and Scott, he's also negotiated many business agreements with the communist country and written books on the country's buildup. Hi, Dennis. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Andre, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you tonight. I'm really excited to speak with you.
Dennis, do you think right now, I'll say China, but also including Xi Jinping, do they fear the United States?
I think if you'd asked me the question in 2008, the answer would be yes. Today, I think Xi Jinping is the single most powerful political leader in the world, and I can explain that in a minute. But no, I do not think he's afraid of us. I think that he sees America as China's #1 competitor, not just economically, but militarily.
Well, right now, as we speak, I mean, in last year, in 2023, we had, crossing across our southern border, we had over 53,000 Chinese nationals that came across our southern border, and most of those, Dennis, were male, and they were of military age. Do you think it's not a matter of if we have a situation, a problem with China inside the United States, but only when we have it?
I don't know the statistic that you're talking about, but I do think that we have to be very careful about the number and types of Chinese that are here in the United States. I'm not in favor of banning Chinese from coming, but when you think of single males coming here into the United States, as you say, across the borders, that's something that really is a concern.
Well, what about, I know last year in 2023, we had, that was caught at our southern border, about 170 people crossing the border on the terrorist watch list. Now, that wasn't just Chinese nationals. That were numerous from countries all around the world. But I'm just wondering, with 170, and it was about 100 or less the year prior in 2022. So it's only been growing more and more and more. Even if you take just a couple of those that may have been from China, do you think that this is going to be a problem that's just going to be happening?
I think that will continue, but my greater concern is the growing size of the Chinese military, particularly in the Pacific. If you take a look at the amount of money that the Chinese have put into the military over the last, really since about 2012, it's been enormous. And in the long run, I think this is what we have to look for as the most significant challenge to America.
I think it was just reported about a week ago that Xi Jinping, or the Chinese party, replaced their admiral with a new admiral there. Do you think that with their buildup of ships that they want to expand beyond China to other ports?
I don't think there's too much question about that. America has, as you know, because you're the real expert, not me, we have a Blue Sea Navy that essentially means we have 12 carrier groups, which is not just an aircraft carrier, but all of the other ships that are involved with them that go around the world. The Chinese currently have about 2. They have one ship that's fairly modern. They have another one that's one that's been transformed, but they have made a major movement toward making themselves a Blue Sea Navy, which means they can project themselves not just in the borders around China or in the South China Sea, but really throughout the world. Now, one of the reasons that the U.S. has always been successful, at least since the end of World War II, is that we've been able to use these 12 carrier groups. As you know, we're having a problem today, not just in the Ukraine, but in the Middle East. The president was able to order 3 of those carrier groups in the region. And that's the kind of thing that the Chinese cannot do today. But if you give them, I'd say, maybe 10 years from now, they can be a very serious threat to the U.S. And that's why I think the U.S. needs to strengthen as much as it can the Blue Sea Navy capabilities that it does. Now, whether that means building new aircraft carrier groups or whether it means buttressing the one we have, but we certainly cannot back away from that.
Dennis, I'm thinking Taiwan, which is so close to the mainland China, just last month, well, I was about to say last month, but because now we're January, but in November, there was a meeting between Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden in San Francisco.
They were in San Francisco together, weren't they?
Right.
At that time? Yes.
That's exactly right. Well, Xi Jinping let it be known to Joe Biden that there was no ifs, ands, or doubts that he wanted to reunify Taiwan with China. Now, talking about the Blue Sea Navy that you just said that China is building up, and with their not just wishes but wants to reunify, do you think that we're going to be having a presidential election later on this year. Do you think that they're going to be moving to reunify before this November election? Or what do you think of their timelines?
I'll get out my crystal ball for a minute. But
Okay.
My best answer to you is no. I do not think that the Chinese would make any move toward doing that before this election. Obviously, the election later this year is going to be significant no matter which candidate wins or which party wins. But it would be very expensive, not just in money terms, but in committing all of the problems that you have by moving into an island. You saw all of the problems that Putin had and still has going into the Ukraine, but there he's going across land. When you think that you have to move ships and people and armaments over that 60 to 80 mile distance between what is Taiwan and the mainland of China, it's very difficult. I think that if the Chinese did it today, first of all, it would be a great military challenge. The second thing is there would be an enormous global reaction against the Chinese, and that would take an economic impact on China. Maybe we can talk a little bit later about the Chinese economy, but it's as weak now as it's been in, I'd say, at least the 20 years, going back at least that far. And do I think that Xi Jinping is ready to say, okay, I'm going to give all that up so I can take Taiwan? No. Now, if your question to me is, what's he going to do after the next election? I think, first of all, it depends on which president we have elected. And depending on that, he might be more or less anxious to go forward. But there's no question that this man, Xi Jinping, who I said a few minutes ago, is the most powerful political leader in the world. And I say that because he has no opposition. In the United States, we have the Republicans and Democrats and independents. You know, when you go around the world, there are different parties. There's only one party in China, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. It's made up of about 92 million people, and they control 1.4 billion people. I'm not very good with mathematics, but it seems to me like you have one person controlling 12 to 15 other people, and there is no opposition. So Xi Jinping is in charge. I think he's looking at Taiwan in the midterm, not the short term.
Well, and that's a good point, Dennis, because I've heard it say where we in the United States, we use the watch, our watches to visualize time, where they use calendars. They use within amounts of years. So I would say what you're saying is that whoever the new president will be, whether it be Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or whomever it might be, they're going to have to show strength, or Xi Jinping will be wanting to make his move into Taiwan. Would that be proper to say?
You make a great point. The Chinese have essentially not a year, not a decade, but a longer view of themselves. The most important date to the Chinese party today, and Xi Jinping, is 1949. That's when the Mao Zedong beat the Kuomintang, and Chiang Kai-shek removed himself to Taiwan. All right. The most important date that I've seen, and I know a little bit about China over the last 20, 30 years, is that they're looking to 2049. That will be the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. If the Chinese decide to go into Taiwan, and Xi Jinping says he at least wants to go forward, it'll certainly be before then. But, you know, I'm not sure that I can give you a date. But once the presidential election is decided in the United States, the Chinese then will make certain decisions that I think are going to affect us all.
Think of companies like Nike, Apple, Taiwan Semiconductor, that's in Taiwan, but other
Yes.
other companies that are doing business in China. How important is these types of businesses in maybe influencing Xi Jinping to either stay away from Taiwan or to make his move faster or slower?
Right now, there are a lot of companies that were sole sourcing out of China. Now, whether it's technologies or whether it's Apple computers or whatever else it is, a lot of companies are reevaluating whether or not they should sole source out of China. Actually, I over the years helped a lot of companies set up operations in China going back 20 years. But ever since 2012, 13, 14, as Xi Jinping amassed power in China, during that time period, you're seeing more companies saying, does it really make sense to single source something out of China? Now, do I think that all of these companies are going to be moving out of China? The answer is no. But take Apple, for example, and these are, I'm not their lawyer, these are public statistics, but Apple itself has been slowly moving its manufacturing operations out of China. It has been done, and the most recent one that was announced, I think you had it on your program a couple of weeks ago, if I'm right, is when they moved to India. So part of the assembly of the Apple products are being moved to India. There are already some in Southeast Asia, and I think you're seeing some of it come back to the United States. This is what people talk about offshoring or reshoring. But in the old days, you went to the cheapest place, you made it, you took it away, you made a lot of money if you're a foreign corporation. That's why China was great. But what most people don't realize is if you go back to about 2001, manufacturing in China was very inexpensive, okay, relative to the rest of the world. But it's not cheap or inexpensive to make something in China as it was in the past. Now, while maybe it was 20% or 25% of making in China versus the US, today it's more like 65 to 70%. Still less money, but what did COVID teach us whenever we had a problem with the global supply chains? If you are sole sourced and for whatever reason things get cut off, you're in a big problem. And look at what happened with Russia. When Russia went into the Ukraine now 2 years ago, illegally, improperly, what happened? You had things like palladium, which we use in catalytic converters in cars. A lot of that comes from Russia and Ukraine. Guess what happened? The price of that palladium went up because there was less of it available because of wars. So, Andre, what we're seeing is external events that nobody can really control, like the war in the Ukraine now, are affecting global supply chains, and so it's a concern. My bottom line is that actually I think I pulled this out for you. There's a Wall Street Journal article, November 7th, and that the title is "Foreign Firms Stop Reinvesting in China, Pulling Billions Out." That's not my words, that's the Wall Street Journal. And so this is not something that's unrecognized, but I think it's more broadly based than people understand.
Well, Dennis, right now, to my understanding, on the books in the United States, there's a law called, and the acronym is like CFIUS, which is the
Yes.
Committee for Foreign Investments in the United States. So, like what we're talking about right now, but also, you know what I'm thinking, Dennis, is that right now, there's for the last 8 years or so, China or Chinese companies is buying a lot of farmland, which happens to be right near military bases. Can this CFIUS law, or can it be either used, or is it not able to be used to either stop, like what we're talking about, but also the purchasing of all this farmland, which is right next to or near U.S. military bases?
I have two answers for you. Number one, CFIUS has already been used in the Pacific Northwest because there was a Chinese company there that had bought, it wasn't farmland, but it was open land that was relatively near a U.S. military base. That CFIUS, Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States, blocked that because they felt it was against the interests of the United States, our national security. There are also individual states that are worried about the Chinese buying farmland. And what's happening now, Andre, is that you're getting not just the federal CFIUS law, but you're getting states getting into it. Maybe I can give you one interesting example. There's a Japanese company that recently purchased U.S. Steel or has made an offer for U.S. Steel. CFIUS is looking at that, and they're trying to decide, is this against the national security interest of the United States? In my opinion, by the way, I don't represent U.S. Steel. I don't represent the Japanese company, but it probably is not a threat to the United States. But if a Chinese company came and said, I want to buy U.S. Steel and its technology, that's the kind of thing that CFIUS would say, is it against the national interest of the United States that a Chinese company would control steel industry? One other thing, Chinese companies, steel companies, what percentage of the global steel market do you think they control? I'll tell you in a minute. That's my question. Okay. The answer is 54%.
Really?
Think about that. So 54% of the steel that's being produced around the world, the Japanese control in the steel industry is probably about 18 to 20%. So, and the U.S. is number 4. So CFIUS came about in the 1980s. Whenever I don't know if you remember, there was a Japan bashing time. Yep. Everybody thought Japan was going to be number 1 and control the world. CFIUS was a law put together by the Congress saying, let's look at these. Now it's being applied not to Japan, but to China.
And I mean, do you think that in the upcoming presidential race, we talked a little bit about the upcoming November race, how important do you think the subject of China is going to be, and should it be more so?
I've been writing a book for the last 2 years that'll be out in a couple of months. I can't say more than that. I can't tell you the title, but it's all about China. I wrote the book, and it's basically finished now, because I think, aside from domestic issues and immigration that you talked about earlier, the major issue that I think is going to be very important in that race is, what is the relationship of the United States to China? Is it favorable? Is it unfavorable? And should we worry about it as a country? Because this is an issue, because who is the major challenger in the world to America today? I would argue that it's China, not Russia, and certainly not Iran.
There was a lab that was found in California that was a biolab that actually had, and it was, people thought it was just a warehouse, but it was actually leased by a Chinese illegal, but they also found to have different viruses in it. They were harvesting Ebola, hepatitis A and B, COVID, HIV, but they also had mice that were infected with these types of viruses. And of what we were talking about earlier, with so many 57,000 plus that were found last year of Chinese nationals that were coming across, I'm just curious, do you think that there are more labs like this? Do you think that the two have anything in common between the labs and all those that are coming across the southern border? How concerned should we be on these types of biolabs that have been found, like this one in California?
I think I read the same article you did. I don't have any specific information on it. If it's true, as it was published, I think it's a terribly significant issue, and I think that should get the attention of the U.S. military and the U.S. security agencies. My guess is it is, but again, I don't know. But to allow another country to have bio labs in your country is something that I find very concerning, and I want to give you 1,000 to 1 odds on a bet that the Chinese would never allow the U.S. to have a similar lab in China. Do you want to take my bet?
No, I do not, because I think you're 100% correct. We hear a lot about TikTok, and it's an app that some states are banning on their state iPhones to be put on there. But we have a lot of young people that TikTok is extremely popular. What are your thoughts on that type of an app?
I am concerned when a foreign government has control over any app that would have a significant influence around the world. But it's also publications. You know, the Economist magazine, excellent magazine, comes out of the UK. I really get it every week. When they criticized the former head in Singapore, do you know what the Singaporeans did?
What?
They banned it. All right.
That's okay. Well, Dennis, I know you've got a new book coming out. I not only look forward in reading it, but would you come back and we can talk also about what you have in there about China?
The book is about China. Yes, I'd be glad to come back. But to be on your show is really wonderful. It's nice to be able to talk to someone like you for more than just 3 or 4 minutes, which is oftentimes the period. So to be able to discuss so many things, all I can say is thank you, and I hope your listeners will find it interesting.
Thank you, Dennis. Hey, if you have a question, maybe a comment about the show, well, we'd love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it piffy, and write us at andre@benecapital.com. Now, for a wrap-up on Wall Street. Netflix's ad business is booming with now 23 million monthly members that have signed on to the streaming service, and that's up from 15 million only 2 months ago. Netflix says the ad subscriptions account for 30% of all new signups in the country, which costs $7 a month and was launched in November of 2022. You ever want to drive the Oscar Wienermobile? Well, Oscar Meyer has just announced that they are opening applications to drive that iconic Wienermobile. It's a 1-year full-time position until January 31st. The applications are going to be open for that position. Plus, I'll bet you can get some good deals on some hot dogs, too. Title is Hot Dogger. 2024 is shaping up to be a volatile year for oil and shipping as this week, as Iran has seized yesterday an oil tanker off the coast of Oman, and shipping costs are being passed down to, yes, us, the consumer. And this week, Saudi Arabia will be cutting oil prices to its customers in Asia, but not to the United States. Brazil this year will be joining OPEC+. So with Russia's war with Ukraine and oil has been volatile, what does it look like for the remainder of this year? Join us next week when we'll be talking about energy prices and what we'll be expected to be paying at the pump, because next week we're going to be talking with Bob McNally. Bob is president of Rapidian Oil and was an energy advisor to President George W. Bush. Now, Bob's written a new book about the geopolitical turmoil that we're seeing right now with Houthi rebels backed by Iran, Russia, who's part of the OPEC Plus group, and not only fighting in Ukraine, but supplying energy to Europe. What will 2024 look like with energy? And will oil be hitting $100 a barrel this year? That's Bob McNally. Bob is president of Rapidian Oil next week. Well, that's a wrap-up on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Our thanks to Dennis for being with us tonight, but always, we appreciate you for allowing us into your homes this evening. Have a fun weekend with the ones you love. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Also, remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music. And now, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.